Perfect. Hey guys, I appreciate you joining us today. We'll have a few other people joining us quickly, Barbara being one of them, and
There
Karen
we
Carlson.
go.
Perfect. And today really what we're talking about a little bit, I think is a topic, one of the probably the hottest topics in 911 has been really two things. One, call automation more generally, and then the other aspect of it has been how you actually automate alarm calls. It's like, I would say almost universally one of the most frustrating calls for call takers. And so this has been something that obviously many people have been talking about for a while. And Karen had the great idea to get really, in some ways, the meeting of the minds together and talk about this and see a little bit of like how we're able to kind of bring the two together, whether it be ASAP on one end, non-emergency call automation on the other, to really talk about how it impacts 911 centers. And so we are also joined, and I'll share my screen here shortly, by the wonderful Barbara Loveless. And I'll let you guys kind of give brief introductions on yourself. Karen, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Max. And good afternoon, good day, everybody. I know we're all in different time zones. Good to have you all here again with us. My name is Karen Carlson. I'm the VP and General Manager of the ASAP service, which Mission Critical Partners manages for the Monitoring Association. I have been in and around public safety for more than 3 decades on both sides of the fence. 14 years in public sector in Northeast Wisconsin, managing 911 centers and technology for 144 agencies, public safety agencies in the region, as well as working for Motorola on the products development side of computer aided dispatch, all of the mobile public safety applications, and several other vendors in the public safety space. So very happy to be here today and be joined with Max and Barbara. I think we're going to have a great content to share with y'all.
Yeah. And Barbara, I'll let you introduce yourself. And also, obviously, your guest of honor, Catherine.
Absolutely. So, Barbara Loveless, Director of Operations at Hamilton County 911 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I just passed my 20-year mark in a second year. This is my second career. I have started out with boots on the ground and worked my way up to the Director of Operations. And since I have been in this position for 3 years now, we've gone through staffing crisis that has forced us into looking at alternative ways to aid our current staff from task overload and recoil time. So we started to learn very quickly that we needed to do something different. And so Catherine, who's been here longer than I'll let her introduce herself. She is one of our co-chairs for our technology committee who test every product that we bring into our center. And it's nice to be here today, everybody.
I'm Catherine Roundtree. I'm also with Hamilton County. I'm a shift supervisor. Been here 21 years. I also am a co-chair for the technology committee, like Barbara said. So we've been working close with Aurelian and all of our other projects that we're doing. So.
Well, also, I appreciate you guys giving kind of quick backgrounds there. And it kind of kick us off a little bit, Karen. I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about like what ASAP is. I feel like at this point, most people know what it is. But can you kind of dive a little bit deeper into how it works and what exactly it does?
Yeah, I mean, ASAP has been around, Max, for more than 15 years. Just prior to 2011 was when the first ECC was launched with it. And you would think that a lot of people would automatically know what ASAP is, but there are still quite a few people in the industry that haven't heard of it. Now, I will say, and this will be the one time that I say this, but we used to, legacy-wise, we used to always call it ASAP to PSAP. We've changed that name now to the ASAP service, and mainly we've done that because with the additional enhancements that we've done, we now can deliver alarms automatically or digitally to secondary fire dispatch centers, any secondary dispatch center, really, private security, private guard services, things like that. So that's the reason we dropped the 2PSAP in the brand name, but it's still the same product. So ASAP service really is a bidirectional two-way communication system. I like to refer to it as a CAD to CAD. It's
Yeah.
just one end of it is not a computer-aided dispatch system. That other end is an alarm monitoring system. And it's basically sending XML digital data through the ASAP broker to the ECC that's handling public safety dispatch for agencies of that alarm. Now, it's not sending those monitoring centers aren't sending every single alarm through because they're triaging it similarly to how you triage an EMS call or a fire call or things like that, right? They're going through their protocol to make sure that they've given some due diligence to ensuring that the incident or the alarm that they transfer over to public safety is as real as it can be and get you as much details as they can. So when that passes through, ASAP is owned by the Monitoring Association, and it is the Monitoring Association, for most people on this call, is a nonprofit association specifically for the alarm industry. So they worked closely all those years ago, 15 years ago, with APCO to develop this platform to basically, improve the delivery of alarms to 911 and to public safety for response.
Yeah. And when you
With
say like improve the
Go
delivery
ahead.
of alarms, like what exactly do you mean by that? What do you think it kind of breaks down to?
Yeah, so if you think about it this way, so the majority or ECCs that are not part of the ASAP platform today, what they relieve when they receive an alarm from an alarm monitoring association, they're answering the telephone call
Yeah.
like they do every other admin line that's ringing in, and they're answering that admin line after 911 is done, right?
Yeah.
And so what they're transmitting is just the things that they can send across via voice. What's the building address? What's the floor or local zone where the alarm is? What specifically is the alarm? Any key holder information, whether that's the person information, the type of vehicle they're driving, all of those pieces of data that they can. And I say this specifically because it's what they can send via voice is what's
Yeah.
going across. With ASAP, those things that they would normally transmit via voice is now digitally sent from the platform into the computer aided dispatch system for that ECC. So there's no ringing phone call, and all of that data plus all the things that they can't transmit via data or via voice is now coming across as well.
Yeah.
So if there's a building pre-plan, a PDF of a building pre-plan or an evacuation plan, photos of the scene, wave files of the scene, things like that. Those are the types of data that come across with that alarm. And then before, when I talked about that two-way platform, if the dispatcher who's received that incident needs more information, they can simply type a request. And Barbara can talk more about this, but they can type a request into their computer dispatch incident, their incident for response or their call for service, and it'll go directly back to the monitoring center. They type in an answer that goes back to the ECC. So it is fully bidirectional, which really saves a ton of time.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
Time, and who wants to hear a ringing phone over and over and over again, right? So when you look at those kind of things I have on the bottom, it's like the average time is about saving that ringing phone. And Max, if you can switch to the next screen, this kind of displays what this looks like, right? What I've just described. That alarm event happens, the monitoring center triages it. That's what's happening in that second bullet. If the ECC is on ASAP, it's going from our AWS GovCloud through a direct API or endlets and over to the computer aided dispatch center of our system of that ECC. And then they're just doing what they do after that point. The dispatcher just basically sees it pop up in their queue, just like as if the call taker took that information from the alarm company.
Yeah. So one thing you said that I want to double down on, because I think this is
Yeah.
probably like to me the most exciting piece of this. You talk about like right now these are phone calls, and there's a few aspects of that you mentioned I want to dive deeper on. One, like sometimes there's a hold. And when I always think of an alarm, it's always interesting because it's kind of the middle ground between, a lot of them are false alarms, to be fair. But there's still the ones that are like actual emergencies. And so like, it's sometimes like not necessarily acceptable that they can wait, right? And then the other piece you talk about that I think is really interesting is like you just can't convey that much information over the phone. Like in many ways, I view phone calls as like it's literally a game of telephone. It is probably one of the worst ways that you can communicate information. And I mean, one of the things I always think is funny, and I'll use an example, very specific to Chattanooga, is what I'm going to mispronounce it too, Barbara. I'm sorry. Is it Uldawa, right? And I think you're muted.
I'm unmuted. You said it correctly.
Okay, I practiced. Uldawa is like hard for me to pronounce. When you get a alarm monitoring company that is not based in Chattanooga, that call taker has a good laugh as they try to butcher that pronunciation. And like they're pretty good at like realizing what that person's trying to say. But at the end of the day, like, why are these even phone calls? We have like a known entity that is, we know reports a lot of alarms, and we can make direct connections that actually make it easier for them to pass that information. And I think 2 minutes is like a reasonable estimate. Sometimes it's even longer for them to
Oh yeah,
pass all of that to the call taker. And that's not even including like, the number of times that I've seen, oh, alarm calls have to be placed on hold because a 911 call is ringing. And then somebody else picks up that call that's on hold. And now you're restarting that conversation entirely over.
absolutely.
Sorry, that's my soapbox.
Yeah, yeah,
Why these shouldn't even be calls.
you've just described the 100% of the value propositions here, right? And I think the why, I mean, the reason that we got engaged in this is to refresh the infrastructure, make
Yeah.
it faster, make it easier for ECCs to connect to it. So those are all the things and the things we're addressing right now to bring them on faster. I mean, the number of ECCs that we have in backlog right now is awesome, right? And we just want to keep getting this information out there to make it better for the telecommunicators. And I'm sure Barbara is going to share a ton of stories, right? And you mentioned there's one of our ASAP users and ambassadors. She talks about how they already had fire units responding by the time the homeowner realized that they had a fire and called 911.
Yeah.
Like units were halfway to the scene at that point in time. So those are the kind of stories. Those are the kind of outcomes that we want to drive with ASAP. And it's really, really important. And I think, with my background in 911, I mean, this is what it's all about, right? It's about making their lives a whole lot easier.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And like really the whole reason why we kind of put this webinar together was I think people often they'll I mean I hear it, I'm sure you all hear it, it's like, oh, we have ASAP, like we don't necessarily need to automate or non-emergency calls and vice
Yeah.
versa. And I think like the whole goal is like how can we actually think about these in a complementary fashion? And maybe, I realized I'm very rude of myself. I didn't give kind of an introduction on me or Aurelian, or really what I kind of classify as non-emergency call automation. So unlike, my phenomenally experienced colleagues, panelists, I did not come from 911. And I've told this story many a times, but we were actually automating calls for hair salons. And we were booking appointments, balayage or blowout, whatever possibly you could imagine. And one of our customers had a school pickup line blocking her parking spots. And so she called the non-emergency line, 2 p.m. on the first day of school in the middle of the summer, and she waited on hold. And she literally just told me, hey, can you make it so the police answer the effing phone? And that's how we got to where we are today. But I think that like that story kind of speaks a lot to like what our kind of core mission is at Aurelian. And I think, an overlapping mission with ASAP is like, how can we reduce the number of non-emergency calls coming into a center? How can we make it so that 911 call takers can focus more of their time and energy on actual emergencies and make sure that these maybe non-emergent requests, like, maybe an alarm or maybe in our case, a stolen property call, still gets the level of service that it needs. And so when I talk about, non-emergency AI automation, I like to think of these as kind of three buckets, right? It's giving people the information that they need. There was a call in Hamilton County we took the other day, and it was somebody reporting that a restaurant was possibly cooking live chickens, and we forwarded them to animal control so that they can make their complaint. The second piece is obviously triaging for the real emergencies. We'll take calls on the non-emergency line that are panic alarms, and like actually transferring those through and realizing that those is an emergency is an important component. And then the last piece is just creating calls for service. We'll get, some people don't use ASAP. Some people aren't on the platform. We'll actually collect information from the burglary alarm, or we'll collect information for a noise complaint or stolen property, and then get that information into CAD. So that's kind of what I think of at a high level with non-emergency call automation, like purely with the goal of how do we help 911 call takers spend their time on 911 calls. I'll kind of like pass the floor to Barbara and Catherine. Got to talk a little bit about their experience, what they were solving for, with why they're working with these platforms, and let them kind of take the floor from here.
Hi, everybody. Barbara speaking. So January of 2024, Max, right?
Sounds right.
We started looking at Aurelian the year before, and I think we wound up going to the NINA conference and we weren't quite ready. It had, I think it was the integration component that held us back a little bit, but by the time we got to APCO, we were kind of chasing Max around a little bit because we wanted to have a more serious conversation. And the reason that we wanted to have a serious conversation is because PSAPs around the country were having staffing issues, and our people were on task overload, mandatory overtime. They didn't have recoil time. They didn't have that time between telephone calls just to take a breath. So you might be going from a CBR call to somebody that somebody's had someone speeding through their neighborhood, and there's no time to just breathe. And we knew we needed to do something, because the one thing that we have taken pride in over the decades is our ability to still answer those non-emergency calls and provide a service to our citizens in a timely manner. So how do you do that? How do you still offer that, but prioritize your life critical 911 emergency calls? And so that's what got us started thinking about what can AI technology, what can that do for us? We had already been with by the time that we got to Aurelian, we had already been with ASAP to PSAP, now ASAP, for quite a little bit. And that had already taken, 900 to 1,000 calls literally out of our call takers' hands. But we still had this enormous number of calls that were coming in. Most of them had nothing to do with what we do for a living anyway. It was, I need to talk to an officer, I need to get police reports. So we started there and then started building on it and building on it and building on it to the point to where now it handles somewhere around the 10,000 calls a month, I believe it is. I'm double checking my numbers. Yeah. Which has absolutely zero human interaction or minimal human interaction. But that time is given back to the call takers to be able to prioritize life critical calls and to also have that breathing space between calls.
Barbara, you mentioned this a little bit. So you started ASAP, obviously a little while ago now.
Yes.
It kind of seems like it was almost like the gateway drug to non-emergency call automation. And I don't know if that's the appropriate way of putting it.
Probably not, but okay, we're there now.
I like it.
But so it seems like, you guys obviously knew this was a problem. And I think it's actually particularly painful on alarm calls because they're often the most rote. They're often the longest. And so when did you exactly start solving that?
Well, that's a two-part solve, right? Because one of the things that's phenomenal about something like ASAP, right, is the fact that that Karen's exactly right. That call is, that is through integration. So there's the what is it called, API? I don't want the techie person. I'm just going to say through integration. So it's integrated into CAD. So when those call centers are getting those alarms, it's coming directly into them, and they can push them directly into our CAD system. So what you're not doing is you're not creating duplication of labor, right? So that they're getting this information, their alarm, I don't know what they're called, Karen, alarm center call takers, I guess. Yeah. But they're then having to get this information, pick up the phone, call us, and give us all of that information. And depending on how busy we are, we have a standard of care. We ask all the questions, but if we're real busy, we might take shortcuts. If you're doing something like ASAP, then that information is going to come in a cohesive, uniform way every time. And if there's a question, it doesn't go back to the call taker to have to call that alarm company back. The dispatcher just creates a command line. I'm going to look at Catherine for a minute. They can create a command line, push it right back to the alarm call center, and ask, is there going to be a responsible en route? Are there any keys on site? So do you have any phone numbers? They can ask any of those questions electronically, and it just is very fluid. So it eliminates all that duplicate labor, and it makes everything very cohesive and just automatic. And not only that, but when you start talking about mobile CADs, your first responder community, your law, fire, EMS, they're sometimes even seeing these calls because they're in the area before we even have a chance to dispatch them because they're right there on their screen. So these are technology you can no longer ignore.
Barbara, I like to call ASAP the unseen telecommunicator, right?
That's
Because
correct.
to the dispatcher, they don't know if the call taker put it in. Well, they probably do, but to them, it's another incident or call for service that popped up on their screen that they need to take care of.
That's right. That is an absolute good correlation.
So one of the things I'm kind of curious about, and I think we talked about this a little bit, when Karen and I kind of gave our spiels. Like, what does this actually mean for you? Like, what does this actually, you threw out the number, I think you threw out the number 10,000 calls removed.
10,228 calls is what I
This is
threw
just the
out for
last month.
May.
Just in May, yeah. Like, and maybe this is a question to you, Catherine, like, what does that actually mean for the floor?
I think it's a huge impact on the floor of the calls that the telecommunicators do not have to worry about. And they're able to focus on the emergency calls that come in.
Yeah.
Like they said before, they might not even notice that those calls have popped up because they're busy taking the emergency calls and the dispatchers are handling the alarms that come in. So
It's always funny, like, and I imagine this is the same for ASAP. Obviously, I haven't had the privilege of deploying it, but I remember when we first went live, it's this weird feeling where like the room just goes silent. Because
yes.
it is like, yeah, Barbara, please tell me about it. Yeah.
I'm sorry, because it's one of those things when I can never say it right. Snohomish, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So their website was one of those things that was impactful to me when we were doing our original research, because when they posted, they did a thing on Aurelian, and one of the things that they said was, it's not your normal new technology where you're testing it and things are kind of wonky and chaotic. In this particular type of environment, instead of things being chaotic and you're trying to get used to technology, it just gets quieter. It just gets less than, to the point to where it makes you just a little bit nervous. It's like, is it working? Is it working? So
I've heard that before.
yes. So we took it slow. It's a new technology. You should be responsible and take it slow and intentional, but there's a place for it.
Yeah.
What's it like with when a storm comes through, Barbara
We just
and
had,
Catherine?
yeah, so we just had a storm come through over the weekend. Thank you, Karen. And I was able to call Seth. So y'all can let him know I gave him a shout out. I called Seth and I said, hey, we kind of weren't expecting this little pop-up thing to happen, but we got the shelf cloud and here it came, and we knew we were about to get hit really hard. And I said, can you put us in emergency protocols? It's nothing big, but it's a little thing, and all he does is he turns it on. It gives a Ava. It says to anybody called non-emergency that we're busy responding to storm-related calls at this time. If this is not an emergency, we recommend that you call back later. And they can still stay on the phone. So if it's pseudo emergency, they can stay, but most people will hang up at that point and call back after the crisis is over. So it does create a sense of calm in terms of what our telecommunicators are having to experience. They're not having to take all those phone calls from people asking questions that it's not the right time, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. One thing you mentioned that I think ends up being really important here is the fact that like both of these pieces of information like go into CAD. And I think like one of the things, and we talk about this all the time, is this idea of like the single pane of glass, right? Like your source of truth. My argument is like the source of truth is always your CAD. And so when you have systems like this, one of the most important things, and this is my obligatory, make sure your CAD has an open API or your CAD is willing to integrate with people. But one of the most important pieces is like, are you able to get this information into CAD and be able to actually make it actionable? Could you talk a little bit about this, Barbara?
Yeah, so we just recently in the last few months, I've telescoped time so bad. It could have been 6 months. I'm sorry. But in the last few months, we've actually started doing some auto integration into CAD through Aurelian. So
Yeah.
when you take I'm cheating. When you take my May numbers, and I had 1,089 calls that went from ASAP going directly into CAD, and then I had 1,404 calls that automatically went into CAD from Aurelian, and the rest of them where it was Ava clerking the call, and then we process the call. And but we also had that push where we could automatically push it into CAD, right?
Yeah.
Or we could process it in some other way. But so those are completely automated or minimally automated, but they make a major impact when you're talking about 10,228 calls in a month. Did I answer the question?
No,
That's
it's
huge.
it's spot on. Yeah, I think like yeah, it's and like the thing I think about is like your average call taker probably answers between 5,000 and 7,000 calls a year, roughly. Um, and so basically, like what you guys have effectively done is with technology, you've added, basically 24 telecommunicators. Like, because if you think, this is a month. So for a year, we're looking at like 120,000 calls, give or take. Um, it's probably about the equivalent of between 18 and 24 call takers worth of power kind of created.
Yeah. For Aurelian, I say that it's for it probably, and you can speak to this a little bit, but I think that when you're sitting there at the dashboard, we call it the dashboard because we have a dashboard operator, but they're basically taking on the workload of somewhere between 3 and 4 people per shift, depending, because if the busy time is Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're probably doing the work of 4 telecommunicators. But yeah, if you add the PSAP component, you're exactly right. Now you're moving up to like 5. So it really has been a little bit of a game changer in terms of I haven't been able to replace people with it, but I've definitely
That's not
given
the goal,
people that
really, either.
breathing. Yeah, it's
It's
not.
augmenting. Yeah.
It's to reallocate your personnel to life critical calls and to give them a little bit of breathing room where they can and allow them to get up and take a break. So in those terms, having a little bit of control is important because you're not giving up control, you're getting it back because now you're letting technology be, build your calls, prioritize your calls because you're not anything that hits that platform that's emergent, it's getting kicked into the center.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty pleased with overall. I'm pretty pleased with everything that we've done to support our telecommunicators using technology. The only negatives, we have Max and his team are very transparent and they send out surveys to everybody that stays in the platform. And I want to say that, it's like 70% positive. And that's not a terrible number because the people that are resistant to it, they're the ones that are calling in and they're not talking fluidly to the technology. They're the ones that are saying human, 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 and or they're not pleased with the law enforcement, fire, EMS response, and so that's where they complain.
Yeah.
But when you literally look at it, if you and I've done it, I've taken all of the responses, I've stuck them over into Chat GPT just to look at what exactly are people talking about on the negative side of things, and that's it. They don't want to talk to technology because they don't trust it. So right now, we're working with Chattanooga to go to some of their town meetings with them to help educate that, at their request, to help educate the public on this.
Yeah, I think the education piece obviously matters a lot. Like one of the things that I like, we obviously look at the external feedback significantly. One of the things I always think is interesting is it really teaches you that sometimes like the way that you are doing things today might not be the actual best way of doing it. And I'll give an example to one of the agencies we work with. We forward a lot of calls for them to the records department. What we found is that their records department has a significant staffing shortage, just like the PSAP, and nobody answers the call. And so what ended up happening was like we were basically like functionally sending people into a brick wall, where they were sitting on hold, waiting for this records department that oftentimes, like unbeknownst to the PSAP, was sometimes just not even staffed at all. And like that kind of taught us a lesson here of like, and this is why I think like monitoring that feedback is so important, is like we actually probably needed to just tell them, hey, you have to send an email, or you have to do this online, or you have to go to the police department in person, and kind of be like kind of almost more thinking about what is the ideal outcome for the caller rather than thinking about what is the thing that we're doing today. And I think about this, like one of the interesting things about this, and maybe this is less true for ASAP and more true for us, is like you now have visibility into why every single person is calling the non-emergency call and exactly what you're doing with that. And I say this like at a big center like Hamilton County, you might answer 1 or 2 records calls a day because you'll have 15 call takers out on shift. And you don't realize that that is actually like 30 calls in a shift, maybe 50, 60 calls in a day. That's all going to a department because you're just thinking about the 2 that you took.
Right.
And then I think that's kind of been like an interesting learning for me and something that we've tried to be like iterative on our approach. Because at the end of the day, like, and I think this is true for ASAP as well. Like the customer, the PSAP might pay for it. The customer is really the caller. It's the person who has an alarm that needs a response. It's the person that has a non-emergency noise complaint that actually needs someone to come out there and investigate it. It's someone who, in the case of the chicken situation, just doesn't know who to call. They've got this restaurant that they think is doing something improper with chickens, and the PSAP is going to become the de facto 311. And that's, I think, like an exciting kind of problem to solve. And it's exciting seeing PSAPs like yours take such an innovative approach to saving their staff time. I mean, I think,
Well, and
yeah, I'll let you talk. Sorry.
I was gonna say, don't forget that our client agencies are also our customers. We're getting
Sure.
these calls into their hands a little bit quicker. So I think
Yeah.
that is it. That's also an important component of all of this. Um, and I lost my train of thought for a second. I'll circle back.
No, I no, I couldn't agree more. And a piece of that, like, I think I want to just kudos to Hamilton County as a whole. You guys are so obviously obsessive on improving the life of your staff and your team and doing everything that you possibly can to do that. And I think like obviously, we see this with ASAP, we see this with the innovation that you guys have done with technology as a whole. But I think that obsession is like how you get people to stay and like how you make their life better and how you actually do provide better service, especially in the long run, to your client agencies and to the callers.
Well,
So
yeah,
kudos to
I
you guys.
concur. And I remembered what I was going to say in both terms of ASAP and with Aurelian. You kind of get there's a white glove treatment. I don't know how else to describe it, but when we're not alone trying to create change. So when I can't speak for any other agency. I'm sorry. I'm going to speak for mine. If I have a problem, whoever is assigned my caseworker, I don't know what their titles are, Max. When I call Seth and we let him know what the problem is, and he goes right into fix it mode right then. And so usually if there's a problem, it's resolved within the day, unless it's something more complex. But it's the same with ASAP. I wish I could do it on the fly, but I'm too big of an agency. But I get a once a month report of all of the ASAPs that got kicked out of the system for one reason or another. And then I'm able to work with ASAP to resolve whatever those errors are. So there are people on the other side of this that are more than willing to work with us on any problems that we have. and sometimes they're not even problems. They're just new solutions that we need. We didn't even realize this was, hey, we're missing an opportunity here. So that is that, and that's something that we can't give up. We have to have that white glove treatment. We're way too busy to worry about how to create a workflow from start to finish. We need help with that technology component of it.
Yeah,
Concur?
that's awesome, Barbara. And you know what? I want to go back to a comment you made earlier about it. These technologies aren't taking away your control; they're actually giving you your
Yes.
control. And I've never heard anyone say it like that before, but that is so true, right? And even, in both situations, you never lose control. If actually, to your point, your operators have more control because with ASAP, you can digitally and quickly go back to the monitoring centers and get more information without that phone call. With AVA, you can go back into those records and those logs and get more information right there on hand. So I love that. I had never heard anybody say it like that, but that is a really, really key point for me.
Well, and it helps, like in the terms of ASAP specifically, you have those I'm sorry, it is a protocol that y'all have, the way that you categorize your calls. So you're able to prioritize them from your end. So they're coming in as a low priority or high priority. So they're prioritized when they're coming to us. And that is highly important. Just like Aurelian, if something, we have what we call a step down. So it's not coming in as a 911 call, but it's coming in as elevated. So Max and his team are able to escalate a call that came in on non-emergency line as something that is an emergent non-emergency call. So all of these technologies that you're not giving up your ability to capture, because we know that an emergency call can come in on any platform. And I think that we have addressed that component in both of these different technologies.
Yeah, love that.
I think it's kind of a great segue into talking about like how exactly these platforms are similar in some ways that they're different. We talked about this a little bit tangentially, but I think we put together this graphic. And Karen, I'll kind of let you work through this if you want to talk through a little bit on the ASAP side of
Yeah,
exactly
absolutely.
how this works.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and we're, where ASAP, the caller or the complainant really is the alarm monitoring center. They're doing that triaging ahead of time, and then when they deem that they need public safety response, they're, I'll call it, submitting or transmitting that alarm to the agency that's needed to respond. The channel basically is, we have a connection basically set up between those monitoring centers and the ASAP broker. And then we have a REST API or webhook API that connects out to the ACC's computer aided dispatch system. So that really is our channel that we're transmitting data across for the alarms. For us, the trigger is as soon as the alarm company hits send, or on the reverse side, it's a command inside the computer aided dispatch system that the dispatcher enters before their comment to send that information back. So it's always a digital trigger to enact ASAP and get that information over. Once, what we mentioned earlier, right? This is why I call ASAP the unseen telecommunicator, because that incident, whether they call it, I'm used to the incident phrase, but some people call it call for service, dispatch record. But when that comes through, it's created, it's structured, it's geo-validated, and it has all of this XML data coming through, including all of the rich data that I talked about, video clips, audio clips, PDFs, things like that. And the dispatcher just dispatches it. Now, Barbara talked about it comes through kind of pre-prioritized. So if it's a law incident, there is something that the monitoring centers are using called AVSO1. And there it's kind of like a ProQA or a triage for medical type incidents or calls for service, but they basically establish a 0 through 4. You never see a 0, you get 1 through 4, and you know how to dispatch them. Soon you'll be getting similar information for threat notifications, and I believe the group is going to be working on fire severity levels as well in the future. So just all that additional data, not to the point of data overload, right? But enough data that they can really do their job well. And, back to what Barbara said, give them time to breathe. Because there's a lot of centers out there in the US right now that they just don't have that time between calls. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, and then kind of high level, very quickly, I think the way that maybe it obviously differs is it's really anyone calling in the non-emergency line. It's not only just calling.
Mhm.
Like if you go to Hamilton County, Tennessee's website, you'll actually see a web chat that pops up. One of the things Karen talks a lot about is how like calls are probably the worst way to convey this information. I totally agree. Not only are calls like an awful way to convey it, I also just don't think people should have to talk to someone if they don't want to. And so one of the things that like Barbara and her team have been working on with us is like being able to expand that to a text-based version where people don't necessarily need to pick up the phone. The second piece is it just talks to the caller like it normally would. We ask the same questions or very similar questions to what your telecommunicators would ask. We kind of continue that conversation. And then we do the three things that we referenced before. But we have a few questions kind of coming in from the audience. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit to that. And this one, the first one's a question from Leanne Slaughter from Summit County to Barbara. Um, can you talk a little bit about how ASAP impacted the center during the storm? Did you have any duplicate situations or anything like that you had to deal with?
Interesting. I was watching it, and this the answer is not really in this particular storm because this was a pop-up. It was very uh isolated. It basically it hit the same areas as it normally does, and it came through in a very, very fast pace. So I did not see anything that like duplication, if you will. But what the telecommunicators do appreciate is that, we were having trees that were on houses. I think we wound up with 4 collapsed homes. They're able to, they what they appreciate is the fact that they are actually dealing with the people that need the help the most. And so having something like the non-emergency call handling system prioritize those emergency calls for us is what they appreciate the most. And they're very, very, just so you know, they're very protective of the technology. So since we call our Ava Evelyn, they're very protective of Evelyn, and they don't like anybody being mean to her. Uh, so it's just it has become part of the culture really now.
That's
But I
funny.
wish I could answer that better. But I can say that in past events, no matter what they are, is we do get a lot of duplication. But with Aurelian specifically, it can show up a lot of those duplicates events right there in the platform, in the dashboard itself. We can see all of those duplications and handle them all at one time. So that really takes a load as well away from our telecommunicators. You want to answer anything to that?
No, you answered it
Okay.
well.
Catherine is a shift supervisor for third shift, so she deals one-on-one with telecommunicators more often than I do.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Maybe I'll direct this one to you then, Catherine. Tony Beasley asked, what did TCs appreciate the most about having AI like Aurelian and ASAP and the PSAP?
I think they just appreciate the calls that it takes off of them, that they don't have to be on the phone with, your wires down or, your repos. They don't have to do those anymore. So I think they appreciate the calls that it can do for them where they don't have to touch it at all.
I think it's actually, I've kind of forgot about this.
Oh yeah.
Repos is a good one to talk about because I feel like in many ways that's almost like a similar thing to alarm calls where they tend to be long and they tend to be the same people calling in. Can you talk about kind of how you guys worked through that?
I want to say that y'all worked through that because it wasn't even in our consciousness that there was an opportunity, right? So this is back to that little bit of a white glove. You saw this repetition of information that's coming in, and it's coming in the same way every time. And it created an opportunity for us to send a link to our guys, the guys that I don't want to say companies because there is the ones that are driving the trucks. They call in, they get this link to the form, they fill out the form for us, and it comes in through the dashboard, and then we're able to run the bin and make sure there's not a problem with it, and it goes straight into our CAD system, and we are, because a lot of times, and anyone listening that runs a comm center or worked in a comm center, when these guys are calling in from the side of the road, you have that background traffic. Sometimes they're trying to have a sidebar conversation at the same time they're trying to talk to the telecommunicator. So this puts all of that information into the control of the person that's doing the tow, and it gets it off of my comm center. So it comes in a very precise way. So it was an opportunity, and it has worked out well. It took a few little sticky wickets to get in there, but that's what it takes to grow. You got to grow in the uncomfortable zone. And I would never think that I would have adopted this, and so how easily I've been able to adopt it and embrace it. I'm very surprised, so, and happy.
I have to say too, even if the record drivers do not use the forms, it still does really well at translating the bin and the tag, even with that background noise. And so it does really good. We very rarely have to call someone back. If we have to
Yeah,
call
the
them back,
vans
it's
are
because they
always.
gave the wrong information.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Tony asked another question, and I think this one's maybe best directed to me. Does Aurelian have, or ASAP, have the capability to contact utilities companies instead of the TCs having to make that call? So for the Aurelian side, this is actually something that we're tracking pretty seriously. The short answer is actually right now we don't. And the main reason is that the legality of calling somebody with AI outbound is questionable at best. But it is something that we want to do because like a lot of times, like in the worst possible moment, the idea that you're having to do an outbound call is crazy to me. An extreme example of this is like if you had a plane crash, like oftentimes you have to call NTSB or call the FAA, and like making those calls when you are having probably the busiest day of your year does not seem like the best use of your time. I don't know if PSAP, if ASAP has anything associated on that side. Oh, I see you just
Yeah,
answered.
Max, I typed it in the question and answer, but ASAP does not have that capability either. Um, it's ASAP's basically just that data broker that's sending information from point A to point B, and doesn't have that call out type of capability.
That makes sense. And then maybe we'll call this as the last question. A question from David. Barbara, what's something Ava or Aurelian handled in the early weeks that your team didn't expect it to, and how did that change the conversation internally about what to trust with it? We're talking about ancient history, so dust off the cobwebs.
David, I didn't trust anything about AI. Um, and it wasn't because, but anybody that works at a comm center from the early 2000s, 1990s, 2000s, we're pretty much all A-type personalities, so it's hard to let go of that control. And we sat down and we had conversations, and we got out the guide card books, and we did all of the things. I can't remember um, what are some calls that we handled in the early weeks that we didn't expect it to. I want to say that the biggest thing was getting the request for records and police officer calls off of us. It seemed, you don't realize it, but it's like what you were saying, like 30 something calls a day. And here we are a year and a half later. I'm sorry, David, I'm going off topic because I'm so far away from that beginning that between these two technologies that it's handling 329 calls a day. And a lot of those calls are literally shunting the calls away from us to what would be considered more of a 311 type of call. And we've trained the public to call 911 for everything. So I think the most surprising part was how many things we were handling that we should have never been handling to start with. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, oh, that makes sense. Well, as we're wrapping up, I'll kind of open up the floor. Karen, any parting words for the audience? Anything for them to think about?
Yeah, thanks, Max. I think the one thing, and first of all, this has been a fantastic panel with both you and Barbara. So thank you for having us in. I think the one thing is uh, when you look at technology, look at what it can do for your environment, right? And basically your users. I mean, everyone on this call knows that the biggest part of your budget and that is your labor, and you want to make sure that you're attending to their needs as best you can, because we all know the statistics about how short everyone is running, and the stress level impacts. So looking at technology as a way to, kind of offset and augment your staff. I think, we talked about it earlier, the load that it can take, but it's not going to eliminate staff. It's going to make their life better. And so just looking at technology from that standpoint of how to reduce the stress and the environment and keep your control. I love that Barbara said that, and I want to keep queuing in on that.
100%.
Well, Barbara, Catherine, anything for the audience?
Go ahead. Go, Barbara. Okay. So from one controlling person to all the other controlling people out there, if you're having any kind of task overload or staffing issue, because even as we're building our staffing back up, there's a place for this. We never want to replace our staff with technology. We just want to help them to get the best outcome possible. To lend in a little bit more to David's question, some of those things that are being handled, you get those priority 3 theft calls and, theft from vehicles, all these things that can create a CAD card that we don't no longer have to touch. This is worth every ounce of energy, because there is work that has to be, it's a cooperative. But if you are intentional and careful and working, showing up for your biweekly meetings and taking care of everything that you need to do, you can build this specific to your agency and it becomes a game changer. So my 10,228 calls a month, that's not a joke. That's no joke. That's 320 something calls a day. And I was just asking Catherine, I put y'all on mute and asked her about how many calls does a telecommunicator take a day. And it's over 100 at the busiest time of day and 30 something at the lowest end of the day. So there's my 3 call takers right there. If all 3 of them were on a busy shift, it's worth it.
Well, thank you all for one, Karen, Barbara, Catherine. Thank you for joining us and talking about this. And obviously, thank you for everyone in the audience for joining us.
Thank you for
This is
having us.
something we're obviously very passionate about. We care a lot about it. And I generally think about it as like, I actually care maybe deceptively little about how people reduce their non-emergency call automation. I just think this is something that every agency needs to do. And I want to like, in many ways, like shake people out of it. Like, hey, this is not okay. Like you shouldn't be 70% of your calls should not be non-emergency calls. You shouldn't be spending most of your time on this. Like there's a future where this isn't the case. And so I appreciate you all joining us and talking about it. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you all. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.